are here for another segment of the Fully Bossed Ask a CEO initiative. Absolutely honoured and delighted to have the lovely Michelle Gadsden-Williams with us, join us all the way from New York. Thank you so much again for joining us. And I know that when I read your profile, we were simply attracted to having you join us on this interview series. You've got a really, really impressive background, but I do not want to steal any of your thunder by talking about it, and I want to do it justice. So why don't you start off by telling us a little bit about yourself? We'd love to know your personal background as your current role, and then how you got to this role, and then we can take it from there.
But first of all, I want to thank you, Ollie, for having this platform for all of us to share salient stories, using ourselves as protagonists to make points. I am incredibly delighted to be here with you. So thank you. A little bit about myself. I'm from New Jersey, born and raised. I am an identical twin. I'm 3 minutes younger than my sister, Monique. And despite identical appearances, they say identical twins prefer to have their own unique identities, especially as they get older, but I was no different in that respect. So while my sister and I have a very close, special bond, I always wrestled with trying to find my own sense of self and my own unique identity outside of my twin siblingship. So for the longest time, it was really interesting. Our neighbors would call us twin instead of by our first names, and which I despised. But if I fast forward to current day, I've always thought about what's going to differentiate me from everyone else. And that stemmed from being a twin and trying to understand what was going to differentiate me from my twin sister so that I could be my own unique person. So at any rate, that's a little bit of background in terms of who I am. We were raised by Southern parents with low South Carolina values. My father's a retired executive. My mother's an entrepreneur. I have a younger sister who's 12 years younger, Alicia. And, every morning as my parents would prepare us to go to school, my father would ask my sisters and I, so girls, what do you want to do? Who do you want to be? Where do you want to go? Now, these are sophisticated questions to ask kindergartners or grade school children, but this was my parents' way of allowing us to understand the importance of articulating and expressing our thoughts in a very, very clear and concise way at a very early age. So they really developed our skills through that process. And this is something that I carry with me even to this day, and I'm getting close to my mid-50s now. I always ask myself that same question at the top of every year: who are you? Where do you want to go? What do you want to be? And so these are some of the foundational things that my parents taught me early on. As I mentioned, I was raised in New Jersey, educated there. I started my career in marketing very early on. Right out of undergraduate school. My undergraduate degree is in marketing. And basically what I was doing was replicating my father's career. He worked in marketing and manufacturing. And I said, oh, that looks sexy and interesting. I'll do the same. So I received my degree, started working for an organization. I liked what I was doing, didn't necessarily love it. So I left that company and went to another firm that allowed me to rotate to different divisions within that organization. It was almost like a rotational program. For graduate students. And so I did that for 18 months. And my last rotation was in human resources. And so what I was charged with was to go to all the best-in-class organizations at that time to figure out how they were going to develop and deploy a diversity strategy for that firm. So I went to the then best-in-class organizations across the United States, came back after all of that fact-finding, came back to that organization, presented my findings and a recommendation to the company and to the executive committee. And at the end of my presentation, the president said, so do you want the job? I said, what job? He said, you've just created a position for yourself. Do you want to lead diversity for this firm? And I said, absolutely yes. And I said, absolutely yes, for a couple of reasons. Number one, this organization, this new position would allow me to stretch and grow in a different kind of way. Although I liked marketing, I didn't love it, but at least I was going to leverage the analytical rigor that I had learned of being a marketer. It would also allow me to get closer to people. I enjoy understanding how people lead, how they engage, and ultimately how they succeed. So that I was going to check that box. And then the third was really around understanding culture and what that means in terms of how people ascend within an organization and process. So this new role was really going to check a few boxes for me. And so I've been doing this work ever since. And that was 30 years ago, to be quite honest with you. So
Wow.
I've spent 30 years of my professional career doing this work, and I've had the privilege of working in a number of different industries, from big pharma to consumer goods to professional services. I was an entrepreneur for a little bit, and we can talk about that momentarily. And I also
Wow.
then made my way to Wall Street, to financial services. And so I've been doing this work a long time. I've spent 10 years of my career working and living in Switzerland, leading DEI for two multinational organizations. I've lived in Hong Kong for a short period of time. I lived in Istanbul, Turkey for a short period of time. So I've been doing this work a long time. And now,
Which is why we
I'm,
wanted to speak to you.
I'm at BlackRock, which is the
Yeah,
world's
yeah,
preeminent Wall Street asset manager. We have
yeah,
18,000
yeah.
employees in over 30 countries around the world, with assets exceeding or getting close to $10 trillion. So
Incredible.
at any rate, I'm enjoying my work. So that's a little bit about
You
me.
I mean, your journey sounds so fun. And the fact that, when I think about DE&I, I mean, even the acronym has changed in the last 3 years. And multiplying that by 10 is the number of years you have been doing this. So we've seen so much variation just in the last, as I say, 3 years alone. I just want to delve into your experience over the last 30 years from where you began across multiple locations and also industries and organizations to where things are now.
Mhm.
Where do you think we've seen growth when it comes to DE&I in organizations, and where do you think we need to go forwards next, particularly organizations?
It's an interesting question. As I take a step back and reflect on the evolution of DEI over the past 30 years that I've been involved in it, I say we've gone from what I've described as a movement and not a moment in time where we're reacting in real time to what transpires in society. I continue to be impressed, and more importantly, really inspired by the unwavering leadership and some of the commitments that I've seen in recent years across industries. I've seen a movement with a real sense of urgency around issues that are pertaining to DEI in workforce and in cultures. But I'm also starting to see a relentless focus to ensure that DEI is just not relegated to workforce representation and numbers and headcount
Yeah.
and how many this or that. It's really transformed into something that I'm enjoying so much more, and that is really integrating it into every facet of the business of an organization. So it's no longer just relegated to just the optics of what diversity represents.
Yeah.
It's or around what the culture feels like. That's important. But I think it's really making progress in terms of integrating DEI in practice into every facet of an organization. And so I've just been impressed with where we're going. I'm encouraged. So this is really a movement and not simply a moment in time.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. It's definitely more than diversity now, and I think that's why the acronym has changed. And I think when I think about DEI, I have a real strong affiliation to that inclusion piece, which is almost, I think, what you're referring to in terms of making sure it's embedded in the fabric, right? So I show up to work and do I feel included? And that's something you can't necessarily measure. You have to feel it, right? It's diverse. If you have the data, you can measure how many women you have, or how many people of color who have identified as a person of color, etc. With the inclusion, it's much more, as you say, cultural, and it needs to be embedded. So I'm really interested about that piece of work that you're doing. But I guess
Yeah.
also another thing that springs to mind is the challenges that sometimes I think organizations face, particularly leaders who have not gone through the journey over the last 30 years, or even over the last 3 years, and may still be doubtful to, do we need to have certain programs for females or mothers who return to work or people of color? You know, we all have equal opportunity. So there's still some doubters out there. And equally, another challenge that I've heard from people is maybe certain leaders are doing this as a tick box exercise as opposed to doing it truly because they want to actually enforce change. And I just wonder how you, as given your very significant role at BlackRock in global DEI, how do you work with that top layer of the organization to make sure that it's something that people, the junior people, feel the leaders are truly represented as opposed to just ticking a box? Because I think if you get the top layer hopefully right, it should trickle through the organization. But where you may find resistance from certain leaders who have just not done things the way that, you know, we want them to do things now, how do you deal with that? How do you get those senior leaders to really get behind DEI and see it as, you know, value to the business as opposed to a burden ultimately to the business?
I think having a very clear and sharp business case, an articulated business case that everyone can rally around. And so I want to take a step back for a second, because I think, unlike diversity and practice of yesteryear, many companies have evolved from what was to what I'm now calling DEI 3.0. And so I think what a lot of organizations are now doing is they've integrated the E in equity into the work, which also
Right.
symbolizes maturity in this space. Whereas we're not just focused on diversity in all the ways that we differ, and inclusion, which really speaks to the environment that we're all trying to create. But I think equity, in my view, is the most important factor in this equation, whereas we are now re-examining policies and practices to ensure fair access to advancement and opportunities, but ultimately fair outcomes for all employees and for the business overall. So I think that this work has really transformed into a different conversation. I think the discourse, the conversation, the business case has now sharpened. And I see the conversation with leaders in particular, that they're paying more attention to what we're doing. And I think they're all getting in the tent of saying that DEI matters, that it's
Yeah.
no longer just this headcount exercise, that
Right.
you have to talk about it in the context of what's in it for them. And I think that many organizations have been on this positive trajectory, which has really resulted in progress year over year. But with the convergence of societal injustices like the George Floyd murder, and more recently the pandemic, as I mentioned, I think the conversation, the discourse, and the engagement of racial and social justice, both inside and outside of the workplace, has increased exponentially. And so I think a lot of leaders are now taking a step back to say, look, this is no longer about workforce and culture. This really has to do with our clients. This has to do with our customers. This has to
Yeah.
do with our external reputation in terms of how we're
Yeah.
showing up in the marketplace. This has everything to do with our foundation and charitable giving. So there's a fulsome conversation that's really happening around this work. And in recent years, there's been a level of increased level of consciousness around inequities like Me Too movement, Black Lives Matter, Asian hate crimes, the attacks
Yeah.
on the trans and LGBTQ plus community, anti-Semitism, and there's a whole host of things that's happening.
Everything.
And some of
Yeah.
these inequities are making their way into our workplaces. So I think the question now becomes, what are we going to do about it?
Mm.
We need to pay more attention to our people, our culture, our clients, and making sure that we are understanding what their unique needs are and fulfilling those needs. And also, reputationally on the outside, what are we going to do in terms of charitable giving and foundation work and all those kinds of things? So I think leaders are now paying attention. And for those who aren't, I would challenge them to say that perhaps they're missing a trick, because I think the next generation of leaders that are coming into these workplaces are doing a couple of things. They're doing their homework on these organizations to make sure that they are living up to the promise, that they're doing everything that they've pledged and said that they were going to do post George Floyd,
Yeah.
in order for them to want to work there. So I think they're taking stock of how these organizations are doing and what they're doing.
Yeah.
before they even say yes to a job offer in these organizations. So everyone's paying attention, from our clients, regulators, the external markets, you name it, everyone's paying attention. And so our leaders also need to follow suit.
You can't see, but I have goosebumps. I genuinely have goosebumps as you were talking, because I was like, preach it, yes. You were preaching. I love that. It's so important. And there's something that you said around, really, well, you didn't say the words, but ultimately I started thinking about the employee value proposition and the employee's experience, because as you say, it makes a lot of business sense for clients, for suppliers, for investors to really start holding these organizations to account and saying, well, actually, do I want to do that work with this organization? But importantly, for your employee workforce, is this somewhere that I want to start my career, advance in my career, grow in my career, and what's the value proposition for me? So I think that's really important.
I'm encouraged, Ali. I'm encouraged by a lot of the commitments that have been made. But to your point, we have to hold ourselves and our leaders accountable. These
Yeah,
commitments have turned into actions, and we're now starting to see the constructive disruption that's
right.
required to accelerate progress. And I think that's what
Exactly.
I'm starting to see, and that's what I'm encouraged by.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. The other thing that you touched upon was obviously the amazing advice that you were given from your mother and father. Do you think that has helped you kind of navigate through your career to come to the position where you do have all the great things around you, whether it's the autonomy, the ability to enforce, make change, the ability to challenge your fellow peers and other leaders, given the positions that you have held? You've held very senior positions across a multitude of industries and organizations. You know, these are huge organizations, and you are representing for us. Not everyone who will watch this interview will believe that they can get to your journey, will believe that they can go through your journey or get to your landing position. So I'm just interested in, do you think that there's been a strong correlation between the upbringing that you had and the values that were instilled in you, and how you've navigated your career?
Absolutely. I have to thank my parents for providing my sisters and I with a foundation. And
Yeah.
that foundation was asking us those three questions. It's interesting, my father's now 82, and I'm entering up on 55. And, he consistently will ask those questions years
Wow.
later. And I think it really provided a nice foundation for me to understand exactly who I was and who I am, how I show up in the workplace. And as a young Black girl growing up in New Jersey, I had big dreams.
Mm.
I had a very unique perspective and a point of view, and I wanted to be seen, heard, and valued no matter where I was. And I wanted to do work that was really going um, uh, to be purpose driven, whatever it was. All that I
Right.
knew was that I wanted to be where the action was. I had big dreams. I had a North Star, like most people, had aspirations. And those words, those questions served as the foundation for me. And what I will share also, and I say this quite a bit, is, there are some individuals um, who will have an easy go of it in terms of their career. They will climb, so to speak. They will go upward with gradual or a continual kind of a process, or sprint their way to the top of an organization, the C-suite, if you will. And so there are others that have a different path. There's no smooth ride to the top. For those of us who are a little different, our journey's a little different. We might have to take the stairs with a backpack and no air conditioning. When you get to the top of the stairs, the door is locked. And then the question becomes, what are some of the kinds of things that you need to do in order to have that door open for you? So it's been an interesting journey in terms of my career, but I call it a climb. I haven't had a sprint. I've been very strategic about the things that I wanted to do. I've asked for, and I knew clearly what I wanted to do, what I did not want to do. And I knew that I had a dream. I knew that I had a goal. And so if your dreams don't scare you, they're not big enough, as a CEO that I used to work for used to say quite often. I knew I had passion. I knew that I wanted success, but I also knew what was required of me in order to get there. So
I love that. If your dreams don't scare you, then rethink. I really like that. So you mentioned that there was a strong correlation. I can also say for myself in terms of the values that were instilled in you as a child and how you've obviously navigated your career. I guess for people who potentially didn't have that, who didn't have access to somebody actually giving them some form of advice, and then also still being a person maybe of color or a person from an underrepresented background, or what would your advice be to certain people who are ambitious and want to advance in their careers, but actually are just struggling on how to put themselves forwards?
well, I think in order to, in my view, chasing success is a bankrupt activity. It just is. I think you have to understand your why. You have to understand what your purpose is. What are you
Yeah,
convicted about? And
yeah,
so for me, my passion has always been to develop the next generation of leaders to realize their full potential and for them to envision what's possible. And I've used myself as the protagonist in my
yeah,
own story to share my journey. And I know what my purpose is. My purpose is to leave these organizations in better condition than when I arrived. That's
yeah,
it. And I think if you're that convicted, if you're that articulate about what your why is, what your purpose is, I think
yeah,
success will come because you know
yeah,
why you're there. And the time solving problems, exerting your energy towards somebody else's needs. This is not just about you. This is about everyone else. And so
yeah,
I've had in my career the good fortune of being exposed to some of the world's most influential leaders and CEOs over the years. And the common denominator among them was that everything that they did was rooted in their why. And
yeah,
so I would implore anyone who's listening in your audience to ask yourself the important questions. What are you passionate about?
yeah,
How do you plan to exert your power? What ignites that energy, that spark within you? And as I mentioned earlier, if your dreams don't scare you, they're not big enough. And success can be scarier than not achieving it at all. So I
yeah,
think, go after what it is that you want, but just understand what it is that you want and choreograph a pathway for yourself to get you closer to what the dream is. Be careful what you're asking for. Everyone
yeah,
wants that ascension to the top, to the
yeah,
C-suite or whatever
yeah,
it is.
yeah.
But membership in the corporate elite in particular doesn't come easy. And just
No,
understand what it requires, that it's going to
yeah,
require more than just intellectual horsepower. That's table
right,
stakes. You wouldn't
yeah,
work where you work if you weren't smart. So let's not
yeah,
talk about how smart you are. All of
yeah,
this is going to require something more. It's going to require grit, a keen sense of self, mentors, sponsors, a willingness to consistently perform at a higher standard. And you know how the old saying goes: you have to be twice as good, twice as smart, twice as talented, and you might get half as far. At
yeah,
least that's what my parents said to me. My parents had very high expectation for themselves and their daughters, and that
mm,
translated into holding ourselves to a very high standard. I've
right,
consistently challenged myself to keep up, to push myself to be the best, and to compete with the best and the brightest. So understand what it requires in order to get
mm.
to your next. Because I
Literally,
knew I was competing in a system that wasn't built for people who
yeah,
look like me.
right, correct, correct.
Yeah.
But you've clearly navigated that superbly well. I want to talk now just a little bit about some of your personal stories around challenges and how you've navigated those challenges, because you've clearly had an amazing platform, an amazing start in terms of just having values to fall back on to keep yourself grounded as a young Black female as you were navigating through your career. I always say that there's the upbringing, but then there's also the individual, because somebody could not maybe have had access to the great things that your parents were telling you, but actually based on their character, they're going to be quite headstrong and do and want to exude all the things that you have managed to exude in your career. So I feel like there's a mixture of the two. Just want to focus on now some of the times where you faced a lot of challenges in your career, and how did you kind of navigate that?
I've had some wonderful mentors and sponsors that I was able to communicate. There was just a transparent kind of relationship that I cultivated, maintained, and sustained with them. And so when things became challenging, I had a support network to helped me get through the tough times, because tough times will come for
Yeah.
most of us. And some examples of that is, there was one particular scenario whereby I was working for a company, I was working on a project, and I was grossly over budget in terms of this project. And I took it upon myself to decide and make a decision to go $1 million over budget. This is going back several years, probably a decade and a half. And I, again, took it upon myself to make that decision to go $1 million over budget. And that decision, although it was the right decision, I didn't go through the necessary steps to alert the leadership, alert my boss and other individuals in terms of what was happening, and that I made the decision to do that. So I was making a decision in a vacuum. That decision unfortunately impacted my compensation that year. It impacted my rating. I was getting the top rating and I got bumped down one level, which was fine too. It was not a horrible, it was still a top tier rating, but I was in line to get the exceptional top tier rating. And they bumped me down one level as a result of my mishap. So these things will happen. I was disappointed. I was disappointed in myself, but missteps will happen. And I gave myself grace to get over it, but you'll never make the same mistake twice. And since then, I've never gone over budget. I always come under budget. So you learn as a result of your mistakes. So, and I've had mentors and sponsors and other people who I could turn to say, here's what happened. Here's what I did. I own up to it. But I think the toughest was forgiving myself for making the mistake in the first place, because we're always tougher on ourselves than most people. So that's just an example. I could go on and on, but I just use that particular example to say, yes, we all make mistakes. I admit that I've made many, but you have to give yourself grace to get over it and the resiliency to recover from it, because that is what people will pay attention to, how you recover from it and how resilient you are to getting to that next step.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I concur with that, because I think that question is an interesting one, right? So what, challenges in your career and how have you navigated them? And I think you started by saying there will always be challenges. And I think that's the point, right? You said you can give many other examples. I think regardless of the example, regardless of the challenge, just know that one of the things that I try to do is remember that this is one of many. there will be another challenge that I'm going to face, but it's much more around how I navigate the challenge than exactly how I solve it, and making sure that it's solved 100% or 90%, as long as I'm navigating the challenge in the right way. So again, really, really nice to hear your views. You've obviously mentioned a number of different soft skills that you have drawn on in your career. I wonder if you can focus on the top 3 softer skills that you think have been really important in your career, and also you would encourage other people to either enhance or develop in their own careers, and just tell us a bit about why.
I'd say choosing courage over comfort and stepping out of your comfort zone as it pertains to your career, signing up for the unfamiliar and not settling for the status quo and the things that make you comfortable. I've always raised my hand for the tough assignments, for the things that nobody else would do, because I always wanted to learn new skills and to test myself in a different kind of way as a leader. So I'd say choose courage over comfort, and just don't go with the default of doing what you've always done, because that's not what's going to get you to that next level. As they say, what got you here won't get you there. And that's so true. I would also say asking for what you want. Don't be afraid to do that. Once you've done that self-assessment of who are you, what you want to do, where do you want to go, once you've been able to answer those 3 questions that my parents asked me, I think that will be the foundation for you to decide what it is that you want out of your career and what it is that you want to do. I think you have to understand, what kind of an impact do you want to have in these workplaces? Ask for what you want, but be very clear about what it is that you don't want to do. Because if you don't tell them what you don't want to do, they will make that decision for you. And you don't want that. So be very clear, articulate exactly what it is that you want. And what I would also say is leave no one behind. Lift others as you climb up the corporate ladder. That is our responsibility as professionals, as women, as people of color. We need to do more of that. I want to see more of that happening. No more rolling up of the drawbridge once you've crossed over to the other side to leadership, and then you forget about everyone else that helped you along the way. I also say, leverage your difference and experiences as teachable moments. I revel in the fact that I am a woman and that I am a woman of color unapologetically. And how I am showing up to you and your viewers here today is exactly how I show up in the boardroom and in other places. I'm very consistent in terms of my stature, how I speak, and all of those kinds of things. So I'd say consistency, but also leveraging your difference and experiences to teach others about who you are,
Yeah.
especially if you're a person of color, because I think our lived experience is a little different, and people need to
Right.
understand that we don't experience these workplaces the same way.
Two things that you said that I would love to delve more on. I think we've got time, because some of our listeners, they're always interested in the practicalities. And you've mentioned obviously purpose now a couple of times, and I love that you said you focus in on it again. But I'd just love to understand from you how you go about defining your purpose. And I asked you that because it's a hard one to identify potentially. And I think that for me, if I give an example, I understood my purpose only when certain life events happened to me, including the passing of my father, 10 years ago next year, as well as the life event of making partner at Accenture. And all of those events kind of led up to what I'm doing now. But I didn't know that as I was going on that journey. So I didn't actually sit down one day and kind of, think about my overall purpose. I think by the time I understood what it is I wanted to be much more purposeful on, there were so many seeded moments that had happened prior. And I just wonder, how did you know what your purpose was? And did you go through a conscious effort to define it? That's the first question. And then the second one is the practicalities on asking for what you want. I think our viewers would love to hear more about that, because one of the things that we get asked is, how do you negotiate for the job you want, or for the package that you want, or for the next kind of role that you want within the organization? I think sometimes there might be a disconnect between actually setting an ambitious goal, but actually asking for help, or asking for, being really clear on, this is what I want, and this is something that I think I would love for you to help me with. I think people particularly also maybe people of color, feel a little, trepidatious about asking for help. Is it a bad thing? It's not. I don't want a handout. Whereas actually other people are very astute with putting their hands up and saying, this is what I would like, and this is how I would love you to help me. So I'm curious about your practical approach for those things, in terms of defining your purpose in life, in your career, and also how you have practically gone about asking for the things that you've wanted in your career.
In terms of how I've been able to define purpose, I've spent years of my working life really understanding what purpose for me, what that meant. And I think we each have to take the time in order to articulate what that is. For me, purpose means the work that I'm doing. There's a visceral reaction that I would have to the work. I would feel a sense of gratification. I would feel a sense of accomplishment. I would feel a sense of fulfillment.
Yeah.
So success to me means living a professional life and also a personal life of meaning and value. And
Yeah.
that meaning and value is created by me. And it's the scaffolding that is around me in terms of my career. It's the support systems that I have around me to ensure that when I fall or make a mistake, misstep, mishap, that I have individuals who are there to catch me when I fall and to help me get back up and to be resilient and to keep going. So I think that, there was a mentor who once told me that passion fuels success and success fuels passion. And so my passion is the full force of energy that I give to all the things that I care about. And so my passion is my why, and my passion is my purpose. So that's how I've gone about it over the years, but it requires work. It requires this inner self talk of who am I? What do I want to do? What kind of an impact do I want to make?
Yeah.
And so it goes back to those three questions that we talked about earlier on in our conversation. And I think if you can honestly ask yourself those questions and whatever responses you come up with, that's really anchored in your purpose. That's really
Mm.
what your purpose is. I know why I'm here. There's no mistake in terms of why I'm here in the seat that I sit in at the world's largest asset manager on the planet. There is a reason why I'm here, and I know what that reason is. But I've done the work to figure that out. So I think it requires just some self affirmation, some self reflection, self assessment, and it's just an inward look at who you are, what you want to do, and where you want to go.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, that's it. That's the foundation of it all.
Amazing. Amazing. I love that. And then just the second one around asking for what you want.
This goes back to what I was saying about courage.
Yeah.
Um, Speaking up about the things that you want. Um, I've always been, even as a young girl, um, I've always had this notion of what's the worst that can happen? If I ask for something, what's the worst that can happen that someone say no? And if that's the worst that can happen, okay, on to the next. And I've always had, even as a professional, I'm going into the sandstorm. Just give me a pair of goggles. I'm going in. And so I knew very early on that playing it safe and not
Mm.
asking for what I wanted was not an option. It was not going to get me to the North Star. And my
Mm.
North Star was clear for me. I wanted to be a chief diversity officer in the world's largest organization, Fortune 100 company. I knew exactly what it was.
Amazing.
And
Wow.
and I think that, there's no such thing as failure.
Mm.
I think sometimes you just have to dig deep into your soul to reveal the things that have shaped you in terms of the person that you are. And so I just think that we just playing it safe is just not he who dares greatly.
Yeah,
And I
absolutely.
decided many years ago that I'm going to live boldly and I'm going to choose courage over comfort
Well,
without.
I love that. Both feet in, fully up, fully involved. I love that. That's perfect. And I guess we have heard many a times now you refer to these three questions. You did tell us a little bit about who you are already. I'd love to delve into the last question around where do you want to go next? So you've obviously reached an amazing point in your career. You've hit your North Star in terms of what you wanted as a little girl, as she was saying. And I love the fact that you knew exactly what your North Star was. You're there. I mean, BlackRock is obviously well renowned and amazing. So thank you for representing us at the table. Firstly, also
My
amazing.
my pleasure.
What's next for you? Because
That's
even if you talk about your age, I mean, you look amazing for your age, by the way.
thank
But what's next for you? Are you doing more work outside of BlackRock? You are such an impactful leader. So I'm just really curious about your next steps and why you've chosen those next steps as part of your own journey.
Oh gosh.
Have you set
Well,
yourself another
so
North Star,
I
Michelle?
yeah. I am where I want to be from a professional perspective. I'm
Right.
doing all the things and I've checked every box that I've ever had for myself. If I took a step back and think about and describe myself, I'm a strategist, I'm a convener, I'm a constructive disruptor, I'm a change agent. And the idea for people who do what I do for a living is, again, to leave these organizations in better condition than when I found it. And so having said that, professionally, I'm doing all the things that I've ever wanted to do. I've also been a producer. I've produced Broadway plays.
Wow.
I'm a writer. I've written 2 books. Both are bestsellers and doing incredibly well. So I've written Climb in 2018, and my second book came out in March of this year called Driven by Intention. So I've authored 2 books. I've been an activist, as you read from my bio. I've done a lot of interesting things in my life, and so
Yeah.
I'm trying to think, what more can I do? What more can I do?
Right.
I get my joy, in all seriousness, and candor. I get my joy out of helping the next generation of leaders realize what's possible. And
Yeah.
I'm the example of what's possible. If I took a step back and rewind the tape and think about my career and all the things that I've done and all the places that I've traveled to and all the people that I've met, some incredibly famous and some who are just your everyday individual. And I learned something from everybody, every person who I have encounters with. I'm satisfied.
Yeah.
I really am with my
Amazing.
personal life, my professional life. I'm satisfied. So I can't even think about what's next. I focus on what's in front of me and doing a great
Amazing.
job. I'd say there's no place for self-doubt in your career journey. So when people talk about the imposter syndrome, I'm going to take a page out of Melody Hobson's book. Melody is the co-CEO and president of Ariel Investment, the world's largest Black asset management firm. And I've had the pleasure of meeting with her, and we've had this conversation. Imposter syndrome does not live here. I know exactly what it took for me to get here, blood, sweat, and tears, and all of it. So there's no place for self-doubt. Ask for feedback. And this is where sponsors and mentors and a support system and that scaffolding that I was talking about, that's where all of that plays into. That's all helped me to get me to where I am. I'd also say flying stealth or below the radar is not an option. You are going to have to do the uncomfortable. You're going to have to raise your hand for the unpopular assignments. You're going to have to do things that nobody else wants to do. And it's okay, because I think if you fly stealth, you're just going to be with everybody else. What's going to differentiate you from the pack? What's going to make you stand out? What's going to make you different? Why would they choose you to be at that next level if you're not going to do all the extras and do something that's really going to be that bifurcation of you and everyone else? So I think flying stealth, not an option. I see the good in all things and in all people. And I think each experience that I've had over the years has been a roadmap for me. It's been a roadmap that has allowed me to stretch and grow in different ways. Every confusion over the years has been insight. Every fail has been a step in the right direction. And every risk that I've taken has been a reward worth taking. So stay the course. Things are going to ebb and flow, but stay the course and forge ahead.
Amazing, amazing. Well, thank you so much for joining us, for being a part of this Fully Bossed Ask a CEO interview series with us. Really has been a pleasure to have you.